The war started over a pontoon boat. I just finished restoring it, polished rails, fresh vinyl seats, Bluetooth speakers, the whole 9 yards. It was my reward after 20 years of firefighting and a messy divorce. My little slice of peace. I parked it neatly on the gravel pad beside my house, well within my property line, covered and secured. That's when Francis Appleton showed up. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses at dusk, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You're violating the HOA's aesthetic standards," she said, nose wrinkled like the boat personally offended her. I leaned on the fence. "It's on my property." Francis tapped her pen. "Boats are not allowed in driveways or side lots. Page 32, subsection D." I stared at her. "Francis, that rules for front yards and street parking. This is beside my garage and behind a fence," she blinked. "It's visible from the road, barely." Her lips thinned. "Then you'll be receiving a fine, daily." Next morning, there it was. A bright orange violation notice stuck to my door like a parking ticket. I laughed. That only made it worse. By the end of the week, I had 5 more notices totaling over $1,000 in fines. I called for a hearing. Showed up with photos, plat maps, and a laser pointer. The HOA board, mostly retirees, and Francis barely looked up. Francis folded her hands. "This isn't about exact measurements, it's about community standards." "What standards?" "The guy across the street has a busted jet ski in his yard." "That's different," she said. "He's lived here longer." "Oh, so now it's seniority-based zoning." The vote was unanimous. "Keep the boat out of sight or keep paying." I asked, "Where exactly am I supposed to store a 22-foot boat?" Francis smiled like a snake. "There's a public dock at Lake Emberwood. A mile down." That was the moment the plan started forming. See, the dock at Lake Emberwood was privately owned, not by the HOA but by a local marina company. I did some digging. Turns out the old owner had passed away and his son, who lived in Oregon, was looking to sell. Fast. 2 weeks later, I owned that dock, didn't tell anyone, just showed up one morning with a new sign. "Dock under new ownership, usage fees apply." Then I tripled the launch fees. HOA members, no discounts. Within days, Francis was fuming. "You can't do this." She stormed up to me at the dock, heels sinking into the gravel. I shrugged. "Sure I can, it's privately owned. Page 1 of your own HOA handbook, dock access not guaranteed." She jabbed a finger at my chest. "You're doing this out of spite." "Nah," I said, stepping aside as someone paid me $50 to launch their ski boat. "I'm doing this out of principle." And that was just the beginning. The first real crack appeared at the monthly HOA meeting. I didn't go, wasn't invited, of course, but my neighbor, Jerry, filled me in later. He's a contractor who doesn't usually care about politics, but he starts paying attention when his fishing trips get expensive. "They were scrambling," Jerry said, handing me a cold drink on his porch. "Francis tried to pass a resolution to sue you. The treasurer shut her down hard. Legal fees would drain the emergency fund." I leaned back in the chair. "So they're stuck. For now, you've got them boxed in, but she's not letting it go." She didn't. 3 days later, a city inspector knocked on my door. Said he'd received an anonymous tip that I had unauthorized electrical wiring in the boat's storage pad. I invited him in, offered coffee, and handed him the city permit I pulled last month when I wired an outdoor outlet. He chuckled, signed off, and left. Then came the landscaping violations, a warning about my lawn edging being non-compliant with community guidelines. My edging hadn't changed in years. Francis was just flinging darts now, hoping something would stick. I wasn't the only one catching it. Jerry got dinged for having a ladder leaning against his garage. Maria, 2 doors down, got a citation for a wind chime. It was as if Francis had weaponized the rulebook. And it was working. People were rattled. She called it a push for revitalization. I called it what it was, a power grab. So I visited the county records office. Took me 2 hours of digging, but I found what I was looking for: an easement agreement from 1987. Turns out, the HOA had no legal authority over the dock or the access trail leading to it. That land was excluded from their jurisdiction when the subdivision was formed. The trail ran along the edge of the neighborhood, cutting through a strip that had never been properly annexed, which meant the HOA had been charging members for dock access illegally for years. I made copies. Next day, I set up a folding table at the trailhead, printed banner across the front, "Know Your Rights." I passed out flyers with copies of the easement and highlighted sections. People were confused at first, then angry. Frances showed up halfway through. "You need to leave," she said, arms crossed, voice tight. "Public access zone," I said. "I checked with the county. I'm well within my rights." "You're spreading misinformation." I pointed to the documents. "That your signature from last year's budget vote?" She didn't answer. By the end of the day, I'd handed out over 50 flyers. A few folks offered to help me canvass the rest of the neighborhood. I declined politely. I didn't need a mob. I needed Frances to panic, and she did. That weekend, I got a certified letter and official cease and desist from the HOA's attorney. They claimed I was undermining the fiduciary responsibilities of the board. I laughed out loud. Then I called my cousin. Illy's a real estate attorney. Lives 2 towns over. Owes me a favor from back when I helped him rebuild his deck after a storm. I sent him the letter, the easement, and the HOA bylaws. 2 hours later, he called. "This is gold. Not only is the HOA operating outside its authority, they've been collecting fees for something they don't control." That's fraud, criminal, could be. Especially if they altered disclosures or failed to report the revenue properly. "You want me to draft a response, hit them with everything." A week later, Frances called an emergency meeting. This time I went. The clubhouse was packed. Probably the fullest it had been in years. People lined the back wall. I stood near the front, arms folded. Frances tried to open with procedural notes, but someone shouted from the back. "How long have you been charging us for something you don't own?" Frances raised her hands. "Please, let's keep this orderly. Answer the question." That came from Maria, holding up one of my flyers. Frances looked at the board members who were suddenly very interested in their clipboards. "I'm not at liberty to discuss pending legal matters," she said. That was my cue. I stepped forward. "There are no pending legal matters yet, but there could be, and not just civil ones. You've been collecting fees on a property you have zero jurisdiction over. That's misrepresentation at best, fraud if we're honest." Gasps. A few phones went up, recording. Frances's voice cracked. "You're not authorized to speak at board meetings." "Neither is fraud." Someone clapped, then a few more. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. I waited for silence. "I'm willing to drop the matter. No lawsuits, no criminal complaints. But only under one condition." Frances narrowed her eyes. "Which is, you vacate your seat, effective immediately." She laughed once. "You think this is a coup?" "No, I think it's a correction." Someone stood. One of the board members, a retired schoolteacher named Harold. I motioned that we vote on the matter. Frances's face drained of color. The motion passed. The vote wasn't even close. She stormed out before they finished counting. Later that night, I got a knock at the door. It was Harold. He handed me a folder. "We're forming a review committee. We need someone who knows how to read legal documents." I took the folder. "I'm in," he nodded. "By the way, Frances filed a complaint with the city. Claimed you were running a commercial business from your property. They sent someone to investigate." I raised an eyebrow. They left laughing. "Said you were more organized than half the marinas in the county." We both laughed. But the best part came a week later when a police cruiser parked outside the HOA office. Turns out Frances had been skimming from the landscaping contract. Inflated invoices, kickbacks from a cousin's company, the works. She was arrested that afternoon. The neighborhood's been quieter since. The boat still sits right where it belongs. Only now, it's got a little plaque on the fence. Community defender, dock owner, HOA reformer. Jerry made it as a joke. I kept it anyway. The first full board meeting without Frances landed on a humid Thursday evening, and the room had a different energy. There was no clipboard tapping. No stilted power plays, just a mix of homeowners who looked like they'd finally exhaled after holding their breath for far too long. Harold opened with a list of immediate changes: the termination of the current landscaping contract, a temporary freeze on all fines issued in the last 60 days, and a full audit of HOA finances going back 5 years. I watched from my seat near the front, arms folded, saying nothing. I'd already played my hand. This was cleanup. But as the meeting wore on, it became clear how deep the rot had gone. When the treasurer, a quiet woman named Nadine, stood to give a preliminary financial report, she looked pale. "There are several discrepancies in the reserve fund," she said, keeping her eyes on the paper in front of her. "Roughly 27,000 unaccounted for. We're still tracing where it went." Gasps rippled across the room. Nadine's voice wavered only slightly. "Some of it was routed through a shell company listed as Community Enrichment Solutions. That LLC was registered under Francis's cousin's name. We believe the invoices were falsified." Harold cleared his throat. "We've alerted the district attorney's office. We're cooperating fully." That landed like a hammer. People didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just looked at each other, neighbors who'd lived side by side for years, realizing how badly they'd been duped. After the meeting, as the parking lot emptied, someone walked up beside me. Tall, lean guy, maybe early 40s, with a clipboard under one arm and a camera bag slung over his shoulder. "You the guy who owns the dock?" I nodded. "Name's Leo," he said. "I run the local watch blog. Not much of a journalist, but I've been documenting shady HOA practices for a while now. Mind if I ask a few questions?" "Sure," I said, leaning against my truck. He flipped open the clipboard. "Did you know Francis had a private fund set up for emergency community expenditures? It wasn't disclosed in any annual reports." "Not surprised," I replied. "Did your research turn up how long she's been running this racket?" "She started the LLC 3 years ago, but the paper trail gets weird before that. There's a series of cash withdrawals logged under miscellaneous beautification going back 6 years. No receipts." I raised an eyebrow. "You think she'd help?" Leo looked around, lowered his voice. "Let's just say the former vice president of the board disappeared pretty quick when this all started unraveling. Sold his house in 2 days, cash buyer, moved out of state. That was new." I stepped away from the truck and faced him. "You willing to share what you've got with the audit committee?" "Already did. But I thought you should know, someone's been trying to scrub the online property records. 3 listings vanished last week. I archived them before they disappeared." That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I met with Harold and Nadine at the clubhouse. The city had assigned a forensic accountant to assist with the investigation. Her name was Cynthia, and she didn't waste time. "I need access to all HOA bank accounts, vendor contracts, and payment logs from the last decade," she said, laptop open and already typing. "Also, any communications between Francis and contractors, emails, texts, even handwritten notes." Harold handed her a flash drive. "We've pulled what we can. Some files were deleted. Our IT guy is trying to recover them." Cynthia nodded. "I'll bring in someone from the cybercrimes unit. If there's digital tampering, we'll find it." I leaned forward. Leo mentioned someone wiping online real estate records. She looked up sharply. "Did he say which listings?" 3 homes sold quickly after the investigation started. No MLS history, private transactions. "Interesting," she said, making a note. "If they were laundering HOA funds through property flips, that's a different level of fraud." "We're talking federal." By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued, not just for Francis, but for her cousin, the former vice president, and 2 contractors whose signatures didn't match the names on the checks they'd supposedly endorsed. Then the arrest started. Francis had already made bail from the landscaping fraud charges, but this was different. She was picked up again, this time by federal agents. Her cousin was caught trying to board a flight to Costa Rica with a fake passport. One of the contractors turned himself in and offered to cooperate. The scale of it was staggering. Over $140,000 skimmed over 6 years. Falsified maintenance work, ghost vendors, even a fake scholarship fund that never awarded a single dollar. The neighborhood was stunned. But what surprised me most was how quickly people rallied. Jerry, who once barely said hello, took the lead on replanting common flower beds at cost, no markup. Maria coordinated a neighborhood cleanup without asking for a dime. Even Leo started posting weekly updates on the audit, keeping everything transparent. One afternoon, I was replacing some dock boards when a city councilman showed up. Name was Deshaun Ramsey. Sharp suit, zero nonsense. "You're the one who bought the dock," I nodded. "Been hearing a lot about you." "I'll cut to it. We want to acquire the dock for public use, fair market value." "Full title transfer, you interested?" I leaned on the post driver. "Depends, who's gonna run it?" City Parks Department. "No HOA involvement, and we'd like you to consult on the transition." I considered it. "You planning any structural changes?" "Just safety upgrades and ADA compliance." "Otherwise, we want to preserve it." I looked out at the water. The sun caught the edge of a pontoon boat gliding past. Mine, of course, still parked exactly where it belonged back home. "All right," I said. "Let's talk numbers." 2 weeks later, the dock became city property. I donated half the proceeds to a new neighborhood fund, managed directly by residents and monitored by the same forensic accountant who helped bring down Francis. No board, no middlemen, just transparency. We held a block party to celebrate, first one in years. Music, food trucks, kids running wild. Someone even brought a dunk tank with a cardboard cutout of Francis taped to the seat. Nobody said a word when people lined up to throw. As the sun dipped low, Harold found me near the grill. "You know," he said, flipping a burger, "you could run for president of the new council." "No one would contest you," I shook my head. "I didn't do this to run something, I did it so I didn't have to," he chuckled. "Still, you've got allies now." I looked around, neighbors laughing, old feuds forgotten. A wind chime rang softly from Maria's porch. Jerry's ladder stood tall, but now it held a string of lights. "I'll be around," I said. "Just not behind a desk." Leo wandered over with a plate and raised a brow. "So, what's next? You gonna take down another HOA?" I grinned. "Only if they mess with the wrong boat." 3 months after the block party, I thought things had finally settled. The dock was now a city-run access point, the HOA's grip had collapsed, and neighbors were treating each other like people again. But the deeper the audit committee dug, the more we realized Francis's scheme ran wider than anyone anticipated. One Thursday morning, Nadine called me in. Her voice was uncharacteristically tense. "We found something in the old escrow files," she said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "It's ugly." Inside was a stack of notarized forms transfer documents for a community emergency fund account, but the signature on the authorization line wasn't Francis's, it was Harold's. I looked up. "You sure this isn't a forgery?" We pulled the originals from the bank. "They match his driver's license signature, dated 2 years ago." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I opened the second folder, bank statements from that account, withdrawals in cash. Some marked as holiday beautification, others labeled board disbursement. One payment stood out, a check for $12,000 made out to a company called Civic Strategies Group. Nadine tapped it. "That company doesn't exist. We ran the EIN." "It was deactivated 5 years ago." I exhaled slowly. "You think Harold was in on it?" She didn't answer. I left the clubhouse and drove straight to the city records office. The same clerk who'd helped me find the easement greeted me with a nod and motioned to a terminal. I searched every business license Harold had ever registered. There it was, Civic Strategies Group, LLC. Registered under his daughter's name. Dissolved officially, but the bank account had remained active. That night, I waited until after dark and walked the perimeter of the neighborhood. Harold's porch light was on. I knocked once. He opened the door wearing slippers and flannel. "I need to talk," I said. He stepped aside without a word. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and lemon cleaner. His wife wasn't home. He sat in a recliner and gestured to the couch. "You already know, don't you?" he asked, eyes fixed on the muted television. "I know about the money, the fake company." I paused. Why? He leaned back and rubbed his temples. Francis came to me after the big storm 2 years ago. Said we needed emergency funds for repairs, tree removal, drainage fixes. The HOA reserves were too low. She asked if I'd help set up a temporary account, said it would be closed in 6 months. And you didn't think to tell anyone? I did. She said we'd reimburse the community once insurance came through. It never did, and by then, I was in too deep. I stood. You signed for withdrawals that funded fake vendors, Harold, his voice cracked. I didn't know they were fake until 6 months ago. And by then, Francis threatened to expose me if I went public. Said she had recordings. I stared at him. She was blackmailing you, he nodded silently. The next morning, I met with Cynthia and relayed everything. She didn't hesitate. If he was coerced, the DA will want a full statement. But it won't get him off the hook entirely. Harold agreed to testify. Turned over emails, texts, and even a USB drive Francis had mailed him labeled insurance. It contained audio files, recordings of board meetings, private calls, and even one conversation between Francis and a contractor discussing how to move the money without stirring the nest. The city handed the case to the state attorney general. Within 2 weeks, a grand jury indicted Francis on 6 new charges, including racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud. Harold was charged with misappropriation of funds, but avoided prison by cooperating fully and surrendering all assets linked to the scheme. The story hit the local news like wildfire. Reporters showed up to the neighborhood. Drones buzzed overhead. Leo's blog became the go-to source for updates, and he was even interviewed on public radio. On the city's recommendation, we held a community election not for an HOA board, but for a neighborhood council with no enforcement power. Strictly advisory, no fines, no secret accounts. I didn't run, but Maria did, so did Jerry. They won by a landslide. One afternoon in late spring, I got a call from a man named Will Stanton. He introduced himself as a state investigator working a related case. We've opened a broader probe on HOA financial abuse across the county, he said. Your case helped trigger it. He asked if I'd be willing to speak on record at a legislative hearing. 2 weeks later, I sat before a panel in a government building, staring down 6 senators. I told them how an innocent boat sparked a war. How a group of neighbors had been manipulated, extorted, and lied to by people they trusted. I handed them documents, timelines, and a summary of the reforms we'd enacted. When I finished, one of the senators asked, "What would you say to a homeowner currently trapped in a toxic HOA?" I took a breath. Document everything, learn your local laws, and never underestimate the power of a well-timed property purchase. The panel laughed. But behind the humor, they were listening. By summer, the state passed a bill requiring independent audits for all HOAs handling over $50,000 annually. It also mandated full public access to HOA financial records and prohibited closed-door meetings. The ripple effect was real. Back home, life eased into something that finally resembled peace. The old HOA office was converted into a shared workspace, free internet, a community printer, and a lending library. The fines ledger was turned into a bonfire at the 4th of July party. People cheered as each page curled into ash. Jerry built a new deck. Maria organized a mural project on the back wall of the clubhouse. Leo printed a photo book chronicling the whole saga titled The Boat That Broke the Board. And me, I still had the pontoon. Now it sat in a covered garage I built beside the house, fully permitted, perfectly legal, and utterly untouchable. I'd added solar panels to power it and a little fridge inside stocked with iced tea and local beer. Sometimes I'd take it out on a quiet morning just as the mist burned off the water. I'd drift under the sky, no noise but the soft lap of waves against the hull. One day, as I tied off at the dock, a man in a city uniform approached. He was young, maybe early 30s, clipboard in hand. "You Mr. Keenan?" "That's me." He looked up from his notes. Just wanted to say thanks. I got hired last month to manage this facility. First job where the rules make sense. I shook his hand. Glad to hear it, he laughed. Also, my mom lives 2 blocks over. She says to tell you the wind chime lady is still mad about the dunk tank. I grinned. Tell her she's welcome to use the dock any time. As he walked off, I looked back at the water, a boat, a dock, a fight that shouldn't have been necessary. But sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to pull it apart, piece by piece, and build something better in its place. No fines. No fraud. No clipboard tyrants, just neighbors finally looking out for each other.